How do we build a temple and a tabernacle in this day and age, in this generation? That is the topic. We begin this week to start the readings regarding to the building of the tabernacle. And how does that relate to us? That's the main question of the day. And there'll be some sub issues, some sub points discussed, but that's the big thing. That's the big question. Because in Hasidic thinking, I mean, and as should be for everyone, the Torah is for every generation, and the Torah is eternal. But yet the tabernacle was created by Moses, it was buried, we don't have it, and we don't even have a temple now for so long. So all these thousands of years, so all these commandments couldn't be fulfilled literally, physically, but is there some kind of spiritual equivalent? I mean, we read in the prayers, we continue to read about the offerings, and we continue to mention and pray and bequeath God to rebuild the temple, which itself is another question, like, what is the significance of the temple? Why is it so important? So, I mean, there's so much to say about this topic, and I'm sure I'm not going to touch on all of it at all. There's a lot more to talk about. Hopefully, we'll talk about it on other occasions. I wanted to point out something interesting to give off the bat a proof from Scripture of the unique quality of the temple. Again, I'm just using tabernacle and temple interchangeably. The point is, it's a place in which God has designated and which is sanctified for his, to be his house of worship, right? We'll get to more soon. But if you look in Psalms chapter 73, there's a very interesting discussion there. So, it talks about how the Psalm of Asaph, and he talks about he saw the ways of the wicked. He envied the revelers, it says. He saw that they had tranquility. Their health was sound. He says, for I envied. Well, let me go a step back. For as for me, my feet nearly strayed. In an instant, my steps would have been swept aside. Meaning to say he would have gone off the right path. For I envied the revelers when I saw the tranquility of the wicked. So he saw people, the partiers, those who are doing hedonistic things, and he saw their tranquility, they're having a good time, where there are no bonds to their death and their health is sound. They're healthy, no worries, enjoying themselves, they're big and strong. They have no part in the toil of men, nor are they afflicted like other mortals. Therefore, they wear pride like a necklace. Their bodies are enwrapped in violence. And it continues. He says, their eyes bulge from fat. They surpass the fantasies of their heart. They consume others and talk wickedly of oppression. From on high do they speak. So in other words, he sees wicked people succeeding. This Asaph. And he's really shaken by it. They set their mouths against heaven while their tongues walk upon the earth. Therefore, his people return here and suck the full cup of bitter waters. And they say, how can it be that God knows? Is there knowledge in the Most High? In other words, they're saying they're getting away with it. What is God? So evidently God doesn't know. Behold, these are the wicked, and they are ever tranquil. They have gained much wealth. And here is the kicker. Here's the clincher. Surely in vain have I purified my heart and washed my hands in cleanliness. For I was afflicted all day, and my rebuke came each morning. So this is the paradigm. How should I say? This is the fundamental and existential question that often a person who's struggling to do what is right, to do what is moral, to serve God, and they go through so many different struggles and troubles, and yet around them they see people who are wicked, who are making all kinds of compromises and following, their hearts to reach personal self-centered success, and they see that they succeed. And it could bring a person seeing this to be demoralized, and even worse than demoralized, they could lose faith. So you're asking me, what does this have to do with the temple? All right, so let's look at the next verses. So then he says, were I to say it, I shall tell it like it is. Behold, I would turn the generation of your children to rebels. So in other words, if he'd let out and talk about the way he feels and what he sees, the younger generation would turn away. In other words, if he would say, yeah, listen, yeah, sure, you should be righteous if you want to suffer, if you want to have a good life, then be what God forbid. That's what he seems like he's saying, that he's on the brink of saying. If he would let out, if he would express what he's thinking, it would lead the younger generation astray. Then he says, and when I pondered to understand this, it was unjust in my eyes. So this is interesting, when he pondered it, it doesn't need a lot of pondering, but he thought about it, it seemed very unjust. And then he says, until I came to the sanctuaries of God and perceived their end. Only on slippery places do you set them, you cast them into darkness, etc. And basically he says then how their end is going to be very not good. But this was the verse that came to my mind when I was thinking about, where do we see, what the effects of the temple is on a person? And this verse came to my mind. Verse 17 here in chapter 73. And he's saying that when I came to the sanctuary, then I perceived it. So in other words, until he came to the sanctuary, he didn't perceive it. It took being in the sanctuary to perceive, which leads us to understand that just visiting the sanctuary brings a person to a deeper understanding of godly wisdom. Just being there. Yeah, it took being in that place for him to realize. And think of it this way also. Is it really saying that he didn't know this? He didn't know there was reward and punishment? Only he had to go to the temple to find this out? No, there's a deeper point here. The deeper point is that he didn't feel it. It didn't resonate. It wasn't a truth that had meaning to him until he went to the house of God. And then he perceived it as a reality, and he could feel the fact that even right now, in a hidden way, that the righteous person's living and the wicked person isn't. But he had a sense of the truth of the punishment for wicked people and the reward for righteous people. And he gained a certain confidence, a certain calm, and a peace that he was lacking. That he wasn't bothered anymore by this issue, even though nothing has changed. But now he's not disturbed. You could say that, when you go into someone's house, you're going into their environment, and you experience the way they understand life. You speak to them, you're with their family, you get a little taste of who they are. And their feelings and values, you have a little get a taste of that. And that's the meaning here. So when you go into God's house, and so he began to understand from God's perspective. And the truth is, what is the meaning of this? He began to understand that obviously all this is exactly part of the plan. All this is, he began to understand that, the illusion of this world. I think that coming to the temple, he began to lose a taste for materiality, and he gained a taste for, experiencing God and godliness. And these things, these truths became a reality. But I think there's a little more. He began to understand that this world and began to feel it. Again, it's something I think that he probably already knew, but it wasn't deeply ingrained, that this world's experience it's a test. It's a journey on the way somewhere. So what happens here is not the end of the story in any way. Now what happens here is he began to realize that all the pleasures that the wicked experience here, that itself is bringing them to a terrible end. That's not a helpful thing. That's actually causing them a lot of harm. But to really feel that and appreciate that, and also not to be bitter and feel that this is unjust, a person has to look at life from a totally different perspective and feel that perspective. When a person, point is, I think, is when a person sees this world as an end in itself, feels this world as the end of the story. And even though we can talk about, a heaven, we can talk about a world to come, we can talk about spiritual divine experiences, but it doesn't really resonate much with the person. And primarily they're concerned with success in this world. So for that person, no matter what you talk to them, it doesn't make any difference. They're still upset because they want everything. They want to lead an ethical life and a life connected with God, but they also want everything. They want also all the spirit, all the physical conveniences, pleasures, success. They want everything. And what Asaf realizes, that's not the case, or at least, he probably, I'm making some assumptions here, but the point is, he was in God's space, and therefore he looked at things from God's perspective. I'm just going to leave it there, and you can elaborate on it yourselves to try to understand what that means. But that's basically what the verse is saying here. So in other words, the temple is a place in which people can really grow and gain divine knowledge and understanding. And understanding, I mean to say, in other words, divine, it begins to resonate and internalize a lot more. It's like it says, you should not see my face empty-handed. It talks about the temple, that the offerings will be brought there 3 times a year during the festivals. And they shouldn't see God's face empty-handed, or God shouldn't see them. But the idea is seeing. Seeing means that you know something is true. It's a reality. It's not just something you hear about. And something we hear about, we could doubt, we can question, but when you see it, seeing it, there's no more questions. Once you see something, I don't have to rationalize whether it's true or not. I know it's true. I know it's something real because I see it. That's how we are. So the temple is about a place where we see. So that's one aspect. I also wanted to mention it's maybe a bit out of order, but there was an interesting lesson that I wanted to point out to everyone from the order of the readings of the last few weeks. So we've had this very interesting sequence in which obviously there's the going out of Egypt and so on and the great miracles. Then we come to the great event of Mount Sinai. I think we spoke about it in previous weeks. And there was all these divine revelations. And it was the most amazing event that humankind has ever experienced, in which God revealed himself, so to speak, to an entire nation, and all those that also flocked around them. It's incredible. The light and the thunder and the smoke around the mountain and the whole experience. The point is, it's not just that they received the Torah, they received the law, but they experienced God giving the law. That's something totally different. They heard it from God's mouth. God assisted Moses to say the rest of the commandments after the first two. So in other words, it represents an experience, an intimate experience with God. And God comes and speaks to the people. So after that, we have Mishpatim. After that, we have the portion, which was last week, which discusses all the nitty-gritty of human life, day-to-day life. And we talked about that last time, about how confusing that can be sometimes. But the point is that it's business and interaction between people, maybe people even hurting each other, people losing property, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, life between man and man. And then this week, we come to the building of the temple. So it's interesting. We go from this high point in terms of really a prophetic experience for the entire nation. And then we discuss very down-to-earth things. And then we go back again to talk about the temple and basically a communion with God, and really the entire nation uniting together to build this. We start this whole set of readings next few weeks about it, building it, what it looked like, the different vessels, and its structure, the whole blueprint. So I was thinking that, first of all, this is an allusion to a person, every single person's divine service. You can even say it's a certain way, it's an allusion to everybody's day. That's one thing, that person should start their day with Torah study and prayer. And then in the middle of the day, they interact with people. And the end of the day, once again, they're back to their intimacy with the divine. That's kind of what we have. We have the man-to-man laws sandwiched in the middle of these two symbols of divine revelation and intimacy with the divine. I think it also could be seen as the three pillars that represent the Torah and the commandments, which is the first one is Mount Sinai represents what? God revealing himself to the nation, which represents Torah study. In Torah study, person really is absorbing God's wisdom and knowledge and holiness. The last week's reading represents the physical mitzvahs, the physical commandments doing. And finally, this week, the building by the people of the temple represents the idea of prayer, in which the person has to put in a lot of effort and try to reach up to God and meditate about God in order to reach him. So these are the three pillars can be found within these, represented in these three Torah readings from the last 2 weeks and this coming week. So what we're beginning here to talk about in terms of the building of the tabernacle, what that represents, in Hasidic thinking, this represents the idea of human beings' effort making this world a dwelling place for God through human effort, and through human activities, and through actual physical activities in this world. And that's a very different experience than the experience on Mount Sinai. The experience on Mount Sinai was from God's perspective, and it wasn't with any work on their part. At least that's the way it's represented. I mean, it's true there was the weeks of the Omer previously, and there was some preparation, and that's also can't be taken lightly. However, it's not the same. It's not the same. It's primarily they prepared themselves to a certain extent, but at the end of the day, it was God moving towards the people and revealing himself to the people through Moses and directly. And just from the whole experience, we see that it was something that was far above the level of the people. And it was something that was fleeting. In fact, later we're going to find out that the people fell very quickly and fell into the golden calf, etc. So that shows us that the experience did not become integrated, and it lacked a certain finality and permanence. The idea of the temple is that we're bringing divinity down, and it's becoming into the house we're building, and God's joining us in this house. We're building him a house, but it's in it. The same amount of divinity is joining us, and yet it's through our work, it's brought down to a level that we can comprehend it. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the Hasidic idea of the difference of what the Messianic age is going to be like, and why right now we're so busy. We're still here. There's still struggles, and we're still, busy with the Torah and the commandments. So the answer is that at the time of the going out of Egypt, things were given to the Jewish people and the nation of Israel kind of like on a platter. And that was important in order to educate, in order to inspire, in order to give them the initial energy to propel them from generation to generation. But in order to have something permanent, that has to come through human effort. And so it takes all these generations until we finally have enough human effort that causes the divine presence to come down in an integrated fashion, that the human being has sufficiently rised up to meet the divine, that the divine can come down and meet them, so to speak, in a more equalized manner, you could say that. And so that's the idea of the temple as opposed to the experience on Mount Sinai. And that would explain also the verse in the beginning of our reading, which is also a very fundamental reading principle. In Hasidic thought, and that is where it says here in chapter 25 in Exodus, and it says in verse 8, it says, "Vasuli mikdash v'shechanti b'saycham." They shall make me a sanctuary for me, so that I may dwell. They translate it among them, but that's not the literal reading. The literal reading is, "They shall make me a sanctuary, so that I shall dwell within them," not among them, but within them. And so the sages ask, it's brought in a midrash, which is a little hard to find, but it's brought in a midrash, quoted in many works, that you build this sanctified place for me, and I will dwell within you, within every single one of you. It says within you, the word you is plural, the socham, within you, or within them actually. And the sages say within that when you build a temple, the divine presence rests and dwells among each and every one of the Jewish people, the children of Israel. So we clearly see from this statement of the sages that the accomplishment of the temple wasn't just that the divine presence should rest in the temple, but within the people, in other words, in an integrated manner. So it's kind of like when you have a home, the environment of that home, you take it wherever you go. When two people, husband and wife, make a home together, what have you, when a child grows up in a home, the home that the parents make, generally, particularly the mother makes that environment in the house, that stays with them throughout the day and really throughout their life. And so that's kind of the idea here also. The experience that people experience in this house, it becomes ingrained, it remains with them. And even if they're far away, but that always remains their house, so to speak. It always remains the house of God, which is also their home, the home of the nation. I mean, from a simple perspective, I think with the temple at the center, it represented the idea that, and it revealed the point, that this entire nation are servants of God. This is our capital. This is our center. This is what our select few occupy themselves with, bringing the offerings, praising God, so on and so forth. And even from the Levites were there singing, even the Israelites also assisted in this. And this was the center of everything else that was going on. People who come for the festivals and bring their offerings and everything. So this clearly brought out that we're God's servants. And that experience people took home with them. So the way that we can do this nowadays is, as I said, through occupying ourselves with the three pillars, which is Torah study and the commandments, primarily charity, and through prayer, we can also create a dwelling place for God among us. But I think there's one caveat, and that is it has to be done in a way of unity. The temple and tabernacle was a house for everyone, all of the children of Israel, and they all worked together to build it. In other words, it's a place where people came together to serve God as a nation, not just individuals. And so, when a person serves God in that way, where they're learning and praying and giving charity and fulfilling commandments, but also with the idea is I'm doing this together with the Jewish people. So doing that in a spiritual sense, they're creating a spiritual temple. They're doing a service in the spiritual temple, which remains with them. In other words, what I'm saying is that as I said, the experience, what people experienced in the temple was that we're as a nation, we're serving God, and that we're together in this effort to serve God. And that was a lesson and a message they took away with them everywhere they went. And so we have to also take that lesson with us. And that's also why in the Siddur, particularly in the Chabad Siddur, that before prayer, we accept upon ourselves the commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves, because we should be doing the commandments with a sense of we're doing this together. Okay, any questions on any of this? Any thoughts? Thoughts?